Here's an update on the homeless attacker I stopped in a church over a year and a half ago. In this video, I'll talk about my fear of being strong in a weak system, the feeling of shame that I noticed from police officers, and societal lack of accountability when it comes to precise healing of an individual. I went back to the church a few weeks ago, the day before my birthday, to check in on the folks that were there that day when the homeless man attacked. Sure enough, they had said that the homeless man had returned 3 times and just sat outside, kind of looking inside. The issue is that there's a reality to violent situations. When someone experiences violence, at times they may want revenge in some way, shape, or form. That may not necessarily be why the homeless man keeps coming back around. However, that is a very much a possibility. And I said to them, you may want to move your location, because if he comes back with a weapon and I'm not around to be helpful, then it could be challenging. I also am aware of my presence potentially being an issue if he is coming around looking specifically for me, the guy who stopped him from attacking them previously. I could endanger the group by nature of my presence. Regarding my fears coming true and being strong in a weak system, I have a fear that by nature of me being able to do certain things that other people can't, such as defend myself, defend others, that if I have to utilize those capabilities, then I essentially get in trouble for it, and I don't want that. And I think that's been a big fear for me for a very long time. That fear is based on the idea that strength doesn't necessarily protect you, and weakness doesn't mean that you're not dangerous. Because of lack of knowledge of something, a larger system, group of people can put those who have certain types of strengths in greater danger. We've seen this throughout history. The strong can be pulled down by many weak people. I was very grateful the first time that I had to deal with this incident with the homeless man, that I could leverage my sensitivity and awareness to make sure that he was safe the entire time, checking in with him, asking questions to make sure that I was letting him know that everything was going to be okay. My concern is that if he were to escalate with a weapon, then I would have to escalate with my other capabilities, and that would essentially put him in more danger, and me in more danger, and them in more danger, and that just sucks. And I feel like this a lot just walking around the street. I'm very much the kind of person that recognizes the difference between right and wrong. And I understand that there's also many different ways to interpret reality too, but at some point you have to make a choice and say, this is right and this is wrong. This is how I feel and this is not in the best interest of others, so what can I do about making it better? Because I think like that so much, it's like I do my best to be very intentional about where I am, because that energy is going to come out no matter where I am. It's also possible that he wants healing and he wants to come and have like a wonderful evolved conversation and we can all be friends. I would love that, but that's more than likely unreal. The second thing that I have to highlight when I recount that day is the feeling of shame that I felt emanating from the police officers. The sense of shame was rooted in their inability to really truly solve the problem, because they are not empowered to solve the problem fully, and there is no system in which the problem, the homeless man's challenge, his mental challenge, and the issue of him showing back up could be solved. So there were 2 options that they gave me. They're like, one, we could pick him up and walk him to the steps of the church. We can let him go. I'm like, well, then he can walk back in here. And they're like, yes. And I was like, okay, what's the other one? And they're like, well, we could take him to jail for a night and he'll be out tomorrow. I'm like, and then he can come back here. They're like, yes. I'm like, all right. And that's when they suggested, restraining order, and then they could come and arrest him again. And essentially the process repeats itself without solving the problem. Huge point there. They were aware that that was not ideal. And these are all like cool cops. They all do jujitsu, congratulating me like, good job. Seeing how I held the guy and without having to put him to sleep in a rear naked position, not a choke. That's actually part of why the video went viral. I held him for 45 minutes until the police came. There was a distinctive sense of shame on their part, because they saw the sincerity from me of like saying, hey, how can we help this guy? How can we prevent this from happening? And then they were hit by that reality of like, there's literally nothing we can do because the system isn't built to solve the problem, just to move the problem around. That brings me to point 3, which is the lack of a precise system of accountability and healing for an individual. This really made me think about how we really do need one point person who follows a person through the journey from the arrest to the hospital to the night in jail, after the night in jail, putting him within clearly defined processes that we as a society agree on is in the best interest of a human being to help them through these challenges, rather than just putting somebody back on the street. I believe we need more systems of wisdom that can help people. That really gets me to what I'm doing now. The first thing I always do is creativity. For example, my show Justice for Hire, I use that show as a template to introduce ideas for leveling up our justice system, leveling up our culture from the morals and values that create a firm base to the actions that we can take as individuals. This is all fictional, but it's the stories that inform our reality. A really important point that you can find in this wonderful ethnographic novel called Policing the City is how many police officers joined the force because of how the police were depicted in films and television. And because they were exposed to these narratives of what it means to be a police officer, it inspired them to be a police officer. And guess what? Those narratives were unlike the reality that they then experienced, which creates a negative feedback loop, which you find beautifully articulated in this book, and I highly recommend that you check it out. Very helpful for me in my research for Justice for Hire. Outside of the creative stuff, I am actually fortunate enough to be working with someone at the LAPD to bring Tai Chi into their ecosystem. I will share more as I can share more, but it's very, very important, especially given the regulations in California of what is considered excessive force or lethal force, where police officers cannot touch the neck because it would be considered lethal force. And this is so important because Tai Chi World Cup style push hands, you cannot touch above the collarbone. So therefore, the rule set of the collarbone to hip playing area is massively beneficial for the current restrictions on the police force in California. So I think it's massively valuable for officers to learn Tai Chi push hands. And I really encourage playing the sports side of it because the sports side is incredibly athletic and will build a massive amount of strength and sensitivity, and developing drills that are very much based around the interrelationship between Tai Chi and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and real-world combat situations is a big part of my thinking right now, and I'm excited to share what I can as time goes on. I should add that obviously my heart goes out to the homeless man who we had this challenge with, and to the church group. You know, I want them to be safe. They're all elderly, and it's important to take all the steps necessary to protect yourself. So I wanted to give you guys an update. Follow for more on any of my channels. I will always be putting a lot of content on YouTube. That's where I'm most active, but at Jan's Tai Chi anywhere. And I'm gonna get back to watching RoboCop with Michael Keaton because it's actually pretty cool. All right, I love you guys. Bye.